Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. Max and Andre stood at the intersection of forest trails when Andre, wiping sweat from his brow, asked a question that had been on his mind since the beginning of the hike. Max, why didn't we go through the tourist base? It would have been easier and more convenient. Max smiled and, adjusting his backpack, began to explain his reasoning. Listen, Andre. He began, we could have, of course, chosen the easy route through the tourist base. But let's think about why we came here in the first place. Firstly, it's much cheaper. We don't need to pay for accommodation, food, and other services at the base. We are entirely self-reliant, and that's important. Secondly, hiking a challenging route gives us more experience. Every step through these difficult sections teaches us new skills, endurance, and the ability to deal with the unexpected. And most importantly, we get the opportunity to see such beautiful and wild places that are inaccessible to those who choose the easy path. There are no sheltered conditions here. No one has prepared water and food for us. Everything we need we carry on ourselves. And these views that unfold before us at every turn, these wild corners of nature, can't be compared to any conveniences of a tourist base. Andre nodded, agreeing with his friend, and they continued their journey. The ascent became steeper, but the view of emerald meadows and whimsical rocks gave them strength. Every step brought them closer to the summit, 2.2 kilometers high. Occasionally, they had to stop to catch their breath and look around. The road was getting harder, but Max remained convinced it's worth it. Andre, just look around you. Indeed, the surrounding landscape was astonishing. Vast forests stretching to the horizon, bright flower meadows, and sun-glistening mountain streams created an impression as if they had entered a fairy tale world. With each ascent, with each obstacle overcome, new and unique panoramas unfolded before them, each one uniquely beautiful. At the summit, something special awaited them. Tired but satisfied, they finally reached the highest point. Before them lay a breathtaking view, vast expanses of mountain ridges, shrouded in the light mist of clouds. Here, at an altitude of 2.2 kilometers, the world seemed different, pure, untouched, filled with the power of nature. This is why we took the difficult route, said Max, looking into the distance. Here, at the top, you understand that every drop of sweat, every effort, was not in vain. We saw beauty that you'll never find on an easy path. Max and Andre continued their challenging ascent along rocky trails, but it wasn't just the beauty of nature and the challenge to their own strengths that drew them to this route. These mountains held secrets, linked to history, giving the journey a special mystical atmosphere. Once, many centuries ago, during the reign of one of the kings, these places were part of a great mission to find new trade routes. According to ancient chronicles, the king sent a group of explorers and merchants into these wild lands to discover new routes that could connect the East and the West. The expedition consisted of the best people of their time, brave warriors, experienced cartographers, and wise scholars. Their goal was to find a path through the mountain passes and pave the way to uncharted lands rich in rare goods and exotic spices. However, this expedition never returned. The last information about them indicated that they entered these mountains and disappeared without a trace. Numerous search parties sent afterward failed to find any traces of the missing explorers. Over time, these mountains became shrouded in an aura of mystery and mystique. Local residents told legends of ghostly figures wandering at night and of lights flickering on the mountain slopes. Max and Andre were aware of this legend, and as they pushed forward, they felt a special excitement. Every turn of the trail, every hidden corner of the forest could be linked to those ancient events. Once they stopped at a small clearing for a short break, Max decided to tell Andre the whole story so they could feel connected to the past. You know, Andre, he began, these mountains are not just beautiful. They hold secrets. Long ago, during the reign of a king, an expedition disappeared here while searching for new trade routes. Imagine brave explorers, warriors, and scholars venturing into the unknown. They were full of hope but never returned. No one knows what happened to them. Perhaps they found something they shouldn't have, or they encountered forces of nature stronger than themselves. Andre listened, holding his breath. Max's words filled his imagination with images of those distant times. He could almost see a group of brave people making their way through the forests, setting up camp under the stars, and discussing plans for the future, unaware that their future would never come. "These places are special," Max continued, "and maybe we'll find some traces of their presence. Every stone, every old trail could hide a piece of this history. And when you stand here, you realize that our hike is not just a journey through beautiful places. It's an attempt to touch the past, to connect with those who were here before us." With renewed strength and inspiration, they continued their journey. With each step now, they felt a connection to those ancient events. When they finally reached the summit, a breathtaking view unfolded before them. But this time it wasn't just a beautiful landscape. It was a place that carried historical and mystical significance, adding a special meaning to their journey. At an altitude of 2.2 kilometers, looking at the mountain ridges, Max and Andre felt that they had become part of this ancient history. In this place where brave explorers once passed through, they felt the spirit of the past and realized that their challenging route was not only a physical trial, but also a journey through time. Max, being an avid enthusiast of outdoor activities, often speaks against tourist bases, arguing that independent hikes are not only more economical but also offer unique challenges and closeness to nature that cannot be achieved in the comfort of a base. Max also values the physical challenges that accompany independent hikes. Difficult routes with steep climbs, rugged terrain, and unpredictable weather conditions are what make hikes exciting and memorable. Unlike tourist bases, where routes are often laid out and safe, on a hike, every step requires attention and physical preparation. Another important aspect is the opportunity to encounter wildlife. Of course, this comes with certain risks, but Max believes that encountering wild nature adds a special atmosphere to the hike. Seeing a deer, a bear, or even a fox in their natural habitat is an unforgettable experience that cannot be obtained at a tourist base. Additionally, hikes often come with risks of injury due to challenging terrain or unforeseen circumstances. But for Max, this is part of the adventure. Overcoming difficulties and dangers makes each hike a unique trial that strengthens the spirit and body. Max and his friend Andre set out for the mountains known for their ancient and mystical legend. According to the tales, these mountains are inhabited by an ancient horror that chokes people and drives them mad. This legend has been passed down through the years, both frightening and captivating adventure seekers. One of the few surviving members of a past expedition claimed to have seen this horror. According to his account, he felt as though something invisible began to squeeze his throat, making each breath unbearably heavy. His companions started to behave strangely, losing touch with reality and plunging into a state of panic and madness. He described a figure shrouded in mist, with glowing eyes, watching them from the darkness. Despite these terrifying stories, Max and Andre decided to test the legend themselves. For Max, it was another challenge, adding an element of mystique and adrenaline to their hike. They prepared carefully, taking with them not only the usual equipment but also amulets and protective talismans recommended by the locals to ward off evil. At night, when they set up camp high in the mountains, tension hung in the air. The wind howled among the rocks, and every sound seemed ominous. They sat by the fire, trying not to show each other their fear when suddenly they heard a strange whisper coming from the darkness. Both friends tensed, feeling as though something unseen was watching them. This night became a true trial for Max and Andre. They battled their own fears and doubts, but in the end, dawn brought relief. The ancient horror never appeared, but it left an invisible mark on their memory, reminding them that nature is full of mysteries and enigmas. Thus, the combination of economic benefits, physical challenges, and mystical elements makes independent hikes the most attractive form of recreation for Max. He believes that only through overcoming difficulties and encountering the unknown can one truly feel alive and free. Max and Andre, setting out for the mountains, knew that this place was shrouded in ancient mystical legend. According to the tales, something invisible, an ancient horror, inhabits these mountains, choking people and driving them mad. But the true essence of this legend is revealed in the horrifying story of one of the few survivors who managed to return from this cursed place. One of the 7 people who survived in these mountains was Alexander. He recounted how their group of 10 set out on an expedition to study the natural anomalies rumored to exist. At first glance, their hike began as a typical adventure. But as night fell, everything changed. The night in these mountains was unusually dark. It seemed as though the stars and the moon had disappeared, leaving them in complete darkness. The moonless sky pressed down with its blackness, and even the campfire they lit seemed to be fading, providing neither light nor warmth. A suffocating silence surrounded them, broken only by the sounds of their footsteps and breathing. Suddenly, they began to hear strange rustlings coming from the darkness. These sounds were unlike the usual noise of the forest. They were unnatural, as if someone or something invisible was moving around the camp. The group grew tense, trying to understand what was happening, but they saw nothing suspicious. The true horror began when people started to disappear. Alexander remembered how one of his comrades, Dmitri, stood up to look around and suddenly dissolved into the darkness. The others searched for him but found no traces, no sounds, nothing. He seemed to have vanished. Soon, another person disappeared under similar strange circumstances. The invisible horror continued to drive them mad. People began to panic, scream, and wander around the camp. Some claimed to see glowing eyes in the darkness, while others felt cold touches on their skin. One of the participants started to scream wildly, claiming that something was choking him, but there was no one around him. By morning, only 7 out of the 10 people remained. They spent the night huddled together, backs against each other, trying to protect themselves from the invisible enemy. Dawn brought some relief, but it left unhealed wounds in their souls. They decided to leave this place immediately and never return. Alexander was one of those who made it back home. He struggled to come to terms with what he had experienced, and only after some time did he muster the courage to tell his story. Many dismissed his account as a fabrication, an attempt to justify the expedition's failure, but Alexander's eyes spoke otherwise. He was convinced that they had encountered something ancient and malevolent, lurking in these mountains and unwilling to be disturbed. Max and Andre, after hearing this story, decided that this place was the perfect test of their courage and spirit. They set out for the mountains armed not only with the necessary equipment, but also with the determination to unravel the mystery of the ancient horror that perhaps awaits new victims in the dark depths of the mountains. As the group gathered around the campfire to discuss the situation and decide on their next steps, something terrible happened. One of the group members, Sergei, stood up to adjust the firewood and suddenly vanished into the darkness. His dying scream pierced the silence, making the others jump to their feet. Panic gripped everyone. They shouted, calling Sergei's name, but there was no answer. Attempts to find him in the thick darkness were futile. The group began to scatter in different directions, each trying to illuminate the path with their flashlight, but the light only pierced small patches of darkness, offering no hope. In the chaos and panic, 3 more members of the group, Anna, Victor, and Igor, also disappeared. They seemed to vanish into thin air. The remaining expedition members were horrified, their hearts clenched with fear and despair. No one could understand what was happening and how to fight the invisible threat. But the real nightmare began when horrifying signs started emerging from the darkness. One of the survivors noticed something at the edge of the illuminated area around the campfire. It was the severed head of Sergei, thrown from the darkness. A scream of horror echoed through the camp as the others saw this dreadful symbol. Then, from the darkness, the backpacks and other belongings of the missing comrades began to appear, thrown out as if to mock their attempts to survive. Each new item tossed from the darkness intensified the panic and horror. People cried, screamed, and clung to each other, unable to cope with the overwhelming nightmare. The sight drove them to madness. They tried to build a circle of belongings to protect themselves from the invisible enemy, but it was of no use. Shadows closed in around them, and every sound in the darkness seemed like a harbinger of imminent death. Some participants began to pray, while others tried to flee, but they found no escape from this nightmare. They spent the remainder of the night in fear, not knowing what would happen next. They heard whispers, saw strange shadows, but saw no one. Death was near, and each of them felt its breath on their skin. Dawn brought some relief, but left unhealed wounds in their souls. Out of 10 people, only 7 remained. They decided to leave this place immediately and never return. As the horror intensified and stones began to fall on them from the darkness, the survivors fled. The darkness thickened, engulfing everything around, and the sounds of falling stones mingled with cries of panic. The group split up, each trying to save themselves, running as far as they could from the destruction and threat emanating from the depths of the earth. Among them was Alexei, a man accustomed to hardships, but even his hardened spirit could not withstand the all-encompassing fear. Adrenaline drove him forward as he crossed overgrown paths, pushed through bushes, and leaped over fallen trees. Every step echoed in his ears, amplifying the sense of danger. Finally, after running several kilometers, he stopped, breathing heavily. His heart pounded, and it took him several minutes to realize that he was the only one who had reached this safe area of the forest. Silence reigned around, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the light breeze. In the distance, the dull sounds of falling stones and distant cries could still be heard, but they grew fainter. Alexei sat down on a tree root, trying to collect his thoughts. He realized that he had to go back and tell the others what had happened. The way back was long and dangerous, but he knew it was his duty. As he passed through the forest, he remembered the faces of those who had run alongside him. He hoped that someone else had managed to escape, that not all of them had perished under those cursed stones. The road back seemed endless, but Alexei pressed on, despite fatigue and fear. When he finally reached the village, he was met with astonished looks. The people surrounding him awaited news of the missing. Alexei, barely able to catch his breath, began his story. He spoke of the sudden catastrophe, of stones falling from nowhere, of panic and horror engulfing everyone. His voice trembled as he talked about those left behind. But most importantly, he spoke of hope. He talked about the importance of sticking together in such moments, supporting each other, and not losing faith. Alexei's story became a lesson for everyone. Nature can be cruel, but the human spirit can overcome any trial. Survivors spoke of encounters with a being called Sharak Barak, which attacked groups in the mountains. Legends about it were passed down from mouth to mouth to mouth, embellished with new details and horrifying specifics. Those who returned alive claimed to have seen something so terrifying that it was impossible to describe. Words drowned in fear, and memories of those encounters turned into nightmares. People gathered at the local tavern at the foot of the mountains, listening to the survivors' stories with genuine horror. According to the eyewitnesses, Sharak Barak was a creature not of this world. It appeared suddenly, as if emerging from the darkness itself, and its presence paralyzed. Some described it as a huge shadow with burning red eyes, while others depicted it as something more tangible but no less terrifying, with long claws capable of tearing flesh and a bared maw emanating a terrible stench. Alexei, the very survivor who managed to find his way through the forest and returned to tell the story of the collapsing stones, also encountered Sharak Barak. He remembered that night when their group set up camp high in the mountains. The sky was moonless, and only the faint light of the campfire cast trembling shadows on the surrounding rocks. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a strange sound, a whisper or a rustle. People became alert, exchanging anxious glances, but no one wanted to show fear. Alexei sat by the fire, trying to warm himself, when he noticed movement at the edge of his vision. Turning his head, he saw something huge and shapeless emerging from the darkness. The creature moved silently, but its presence was felt physically. The air turned cold, and the fire in the campfire noticeably dimmed. People around began to scream, their faces contorted in expressions of horror. "Run!" someone shouted, and panic ensued. Alexei, overcoming his paralysis, jumped to his feet and dashed towards the forest, holding only a small flashlight in his hands. He heard the cries of his comrades behind him, but dared not look back. Sharak Barak pursued them, its presence like a shadow of death looming over everyone trying to escape. One of his friends, Sergei, couldn't take it anymore. He stopped, clutching his head, and began to scream madly. Alexei tried to bring him back to reality, but it was too late. Sergei's eyes were empty, and he fell to the ground, as if the darkness had sucked out his soul. Memories of that night haunted Alexei. When he returned to the village, he told of his encounter with Sharak Barak, warning everyone of the danger lurking in the mountains. His story became another part of the grim legend, both frightening and mesmerizing. The locals began to treat the mountains with even greater caution, knowing that there, in the shadow of the rocks, something ancient and sinister lurked, waiting for its time to once again instill fear in the hearts of the brave. Andre heard a story told with such horrifying details that it was hard to believe its truthfulness. Nevertheless, the more he learned, the clearer it became something truly strange and dreadful was happening in those mountains. A group of tourists, consisting of 7 people, set out on a hike along a mountain trail. Everything went according to plan until the 3rd day, when they encountered a strange man. He appeared suddenly, as if out of nowhere, dressed in old, worn-out clothes, and his face looked exhausted and frightened. The man didn't say a word, but his eyes spoke volumes. They betrayed an undisguised horror. He quickly disappeared into the dense forest, leaving the tourists bewildered. Later, when the group stopped for a break, one of the participants, Victor, discovered a bloodstain on the ground. At first, everyone assumed it was a trace of a wounded animal, but then they began to notice strange figures flickering among the trees. They were people with broken heads and lifeless, empty eyes. They moved slowly but steadily closer. The tourists realized they were caught in a deadly trap. Panic gripped the group as they realized that these pursuers were the undead. Olga, one of the youngest in the group, screamed, pointing at one of the undead. In the light of the flashlight, his face became visible, and Victor, who had been taking photos throughout the journey, managed to take several pictures. The undead continued to advance, driving the group higher into the mountains. It seemed they had a clear plan to lead people to the edge of a cliff and throw them down onto sharp rocks, where their bodies would become part of a sinister ritual. The tourists found themselves in a trap with no way out, and the night was approaching, promising to be nightmarish. Every step was difficult. The undead moved slowly but tirelessly, their empty eyes glowing in the darkness, reminding of the inevitable death. People were tired, fear and despair overwhelmed them, but they could not stop. At the top of one of the cliffs, Victor decided to check the photos he had taken. As he scrolled through the pictures, he noticed something horrible. The faces of the undead seemed familiar. Victor zoomed in on the image, and his heart froze. They were the same tourists who had disappeared without a trace several years ago. He immediately remembered them back then. The news was full of headlines about mysterious disappearances in those mountains. Victor showed the photos to the others. Their faces turned pale as they realized that their pursuers were the souls of those who, like them, had once come to these mountains and never returned. All the missing tourists had been found, but not in the way everyone had hoped. The undead continued to advance, driving the group to the very edge of the cliff. Olga, who was trailing behind, suddenly stumbled and fell. Andre managed to grab her hand, holding her over the abyss. But the undead were already close. It seemed that there was no hope left. But suddenly, on the horizon, bright headlights appeared. It was a rescue team summoned by the remaining tourists below. The light and the sounds of engines frightened off the undead, who began to slowly retreat into the shadows. The group was saved. They returned to the village, where Victor showed the photos to the local authorities. Everyone recognized those who had disappeared without a trace. The tourist's story became known, and soon the mountains were declared a dangerous area. Andre, despite the horror he had experienced, decided to tell this story to everyone to warn others. His tale became a legend, a warning to those who dared to venture into these ominous mountains, unaware of the deadly dangers that might await them there. When it became clear that the undead would not stop their pursuit, the group of tourists made a difficult decision. They abandoned their heavy backpacks, keeping only the essentials. Their strength was already fading, and the extra burden only slowed them down. Each took only a flashlight, a water flask, and some food, what could help them survive the impending ordeal. The path up the mountains was difficult and dangerous. The rocky trails became steeper, and the undead kept up their relentless pursuit. The tourists struggled to move forward, desperately trying not to succumb to panic. The air grew colder, and the darkness inexorably approached, promising to engulf everything in absolute blackness. However, determination and the will to live helped them endure. They ran, ignoring the pain in their muscles and their quickened breath. The undead, though they continued their pursuit, began to slow down, as if sensing the approaching dawn. Finally, lights appeared on the horizon, signaling the town's presence. It was salvation that filled their hearts with hope. With their last strength, the group reached the first houses, where they were greeted by surprised and concerned locals. They quickly recounted their harrowing adventure, but not everyone believed them immediately. As night fell, the undead fell back, as if afraid to enter the illuminated areas. The group was saved. The locals offered them food and shelter, as well as the opportunity to rest and regain their strength. However, distrust was evident in their eyes, and it soon became clear that not everyone believed the stories of the undead and ancient curses. When Andre told his story to Max, the latter just smiled and shook his head. "Andre, you know that all these legends about Shirak Barak and ghosts are just fiction," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "People have always been prone to exaggeration and inventing non-existent creatures and mystical phenomena." Max, a local resident and avid hiker, never believed in the supernatural. He was sure that all the stories about ghosts and terrifying creatures were just the product of the vivid imagination of those who loved to tell scary stories by the campfire. "I've heard hundreds of such stories," he continued, "but none of them has ever been confirmed. It's all just rumors and myths." Andre, still shaken by his experience, tried to explain to Max that their experience was real. "You don't understand," he insisted. "We saw them. They were real. We barely escaped." Max, however, remained adamant. "People often see what they fear," he replied. "In the mountains, it's easy to get lost, to be scared of shadows and sounds. But that doesn't mean there are really undead or Shirak Barak. We create our own fears." Despite Max's skepticism, the legends continued to live on. With each retelling, they gained new details and became even more unbelievable. Some villagers began to believe in them, especially after Victor showed his photos. The faces of the undead, once missing tourists, could not be explained away by simple imagination. Max, though remaining a skeptic, could not completely ignore the fears and stories of others. He decided one day to venture into the mountains himself to see everything with his own eyes. "I'll prove to you that there's nothing supernatural there," he told Andre before his trip. Thus began a new chapter in this mysterious story. Ahead were new discoveries, and perhaps the unraveling of ancient secrets hidden in the shadows of the mountains. After all, even the most convinced skeptic sometimes encounters what defies logical explanation. Max sat at the table in the local tavern, surrounded by friends and acquaintances, buzzing with enthusiasm after their latest adventure in the mountains. He listened as they recounted their encounters with unknown creatures and mysterious phenomena they had endured. Some stories sounded almost too incredible to be true, and Max couldn't help but voice his opinion. "Understand me correctly," he began, raising his hand for attention, "but I can't help but notice that some of your stories might be a bit exaggerated." These words caused bewilderment and indignation among some of those present. They were confident in the truthfulness of their stories and underestimated the influence of imagination on their perception of events. "How many times have you heard a story about one person fighting a dragon or visiting an alternative dimension?" Max continued, trying to explain his point of view. "Interesting stories make our adventures more exciting, but that doesn't always mean they completely correspond to reality." He pointed out that people tend to embellish their adventures to make them more thrilling and interesting for listeners. This often happens under the influence of emotions and adrenaline experienced during the event itself. As a result, even a mundane adventure can turn into an epic story filled with danger and heroism. "I'm not saying your adventure wasn't interesting," Max assured his friends. "Just be cautious when sharing the story with others. Remember that truth can be much less fantastic, but no less valuable." These words made those present ponder. Perhaps there was more imagination in their stories than they had initially thought, but that didn't make their adventures any less interesting or significant. After all, it's not only about the story we tell, but also about how we experience each new adventure, whether it's as we describe it or not. Andre sat at the table in his usual apartment, feeling the monotony of everyday life pressing down on him with its invisible weight. He looked around the familiar walls, reflection in his eyes, and inside him stirred a feeling of dissatisfaction. The routine was suffocating him, and he realized that something needed to change. "I need to break out of this comfort zone," he decided, gearing up for a bold move. I need to challenge myself, feel the adrenaline, experience the liveliness of life again. The idea of going to the mountains came to him spontaneously, but it seemed like the perfect way to break the monotony and fill his life with new experiences. He decided to share his thoughts with Max, his longtime friend who was always up for adventures. Max, he began, meeting him at the same tavern where they often spent time. I'm tired of this routine. I want to change something in my life, challenge myself, feel alive again. Let's go to the mountains, like in the good old days. What do you say? Max listened attentively, sensing the friend's desire for change in his voice. He agreed with a smile, understanding that for both of them it could become a real adventure capable of awakening the dormant fire of their souls. As they packed their backpacks and prepared for the hike, Andre couldn't help but think about his problems with memory and awareness. Lately, he had noticed that his memory had become unreliable. He could easily recall events from the distant past, but struggled to reproduce recent moments in his memory. This problem had become a source of concern and even fear for him. He felt as if his personality was dissolving in time, as if a part of himself was disappearing along with the lost memories. It made him seek new experiences, new adventures, to feel alive and real again. In the mountains, under the starry sky, Andre delved into his thoughts, trying to find answers to his inner questions. He felt part of nature, part of something greater and deeper than just his own problems. It gave him strength and inspiration to continue his journey, despite all the difficulties. Max was by his side, supporting his friend in difficult times, and together they continued their journey into the depths of the mountains. For Andre, every step up the trail became a step towards understanding himself, towards accepting his problems and searching for new answers. In these moments, he felt that even the most difficult trials could turn into valuable experience, helping to find his place in this world and discover his true essence. Reaching the summit, Max and Andre stopped to enjoy the incredible views unfolding before them. They stood on the edge of the world, gazing at the endless expanses of mountains and the heavenly heights that seemed unfathomable to them. Before them stretched a landscape woven from dreams: green hills covered with soft grass, azure waters of lakes, and majestic rocks towering towards the sky. In the distance, they could see the peaks of other mountains, covered with snow, even in the summer season. This world seemed unfathomable to them, full of secrets and mysteries. Max and Andre stood silently, absorbed in the beauty of nature and the feeling of freedom it bestowed upon them. They forgot about their problems and worries. They felt free, like birds soaring in the skies. This moment became a true source of inspiration and strength for them. As the sun set, when the sun slowly sank below the horizon, Max and Andre sat at the edge of the cliff, contemplating the eternity of natural phenomena and their place in this world. They watched as the heavens were painted with fiery shades, coloring the surroundings in crimson-orange tones that seemed immutable and eternal. "We, humans, are so small and insignificant in this infinite universe," Max whispered, his voice sounding quiet and thoughtful. "But even in this smallness, we can enjoy the beauty of nature and feel part of this great harmony." Andre nodded in agreement, his eyes shining with tranquility and reverence before this magnificence. Many generations of people, from ancient peasants to Roman commanders, have witnessed the same sunsets as we do, he added. This connects us with our ancestors, creating a thread that intertwines centuries and generations. They sat in silence, contemplating the eternity spread out before them. At that moment, they felt part of something greater and eternal, extending beyond their own lives. Their souls were filled with reverence and peace, immersed in the infinite flow of time and space. After the exhausting ascent, Max and Andre finally reached the place where they decided to set up their camp. Max, an experienced hiker, immediately got to work, setting up the tent and arranging the sleeping bags. He was in his element, feeling like a fish in water in the wilderness. While Max was busy setting up the camp, Andre gathered firewood for the bonfire. When they were ready, Max skillfully lit the fire, creating a cozy atmosphere around them. He preferred to cook healthier food than standard camping meals, so he began preparing dinner. With the subdued light of the bonfire and the scent of fresh food in the air, the evening became increasingly cozy and warm. Max proudly offered Andre his culinary masterpieces, combining simple ingredients with exquisite spices, creating a unique taste. During dinner, the conversation turned to an abandoned sanatorium nearby their camp. Andre and Max learned that this sanatorium used to be a popular vacation spot with good conditions and beautiful surroundings. However, now it lay abandoned for no apparent reason. This fact intrigued both friends, and they decided to explore the place the next day. Their imagination was sparked as they anticipated the opportunity to uncover the secrets of the past and find answers to the mysteries of the present. The evening passed in discussions about what could have led to the closure of such a beautiful place, now reduced to a ghost of the past. They discussed various theories, blending reality and fantasy, while the fire slowly died down, promising new adventures at the dawn of the next day. Under the warm glow of the bonfire, Max and Andre enjoyed their dinner, talking about the day's events and planning their next adventures. They were in the heart of the wilderness, where an atmosphere of mystery and mystique prevailed. But suddenly their conversation was interrupted by a strange, mystical sound coming from the valley below. Max and Andre exchanged glances, their expressions reflecting both concern and curiosity. The sound was unusual, resembling a mix of animal growls and incomprehensible sounds of nature, carrying something mysterious and enigmatic. "What could that be?" Andre asked, his voice sounding slightly tense. Max nodded slowly, listening to the sounds echoing from the depths of the valley. Maybe it's some kind of animal, he speculated. But there's something strange about this sound, almost otherworldly. They discussed possible reasons for this sound. Could it be rare species of animals inhabiting these mountains, or something more mysterious and mystical? Darkness surrounded them, and the sound seemed to intensify, as if increasing their anxiety. But despite their apprehension, Max and Andre were brave and determined. They decided that in the morning they would venture into the valley to unravel this mystery and find out what lay behind this mysterious sound. With this thought in mind, they continued their dinner, maintaining vigilance and readiness for new adventures awaiting them at the dawn of the next day. Andre gazed down at the old abandoned sanatorium lying in the valley below them, like a lost world shrouded in mystique and mystery. In his eyes reflected a desire for tranquility, a peaceful and measured rest, which didn't necessarily have to be full of thrills and adventures as it once was. "I feel like such a retreat in the sanatorium would be a wonderful way to escape the hustle and bustle," he said, addressing Max. "We've always sought out new adventures and thrills, but sometimes you just want to relax, enjoy the beauty of nature, and be alone with yourself." Max nodded, understanding his friend's words. He too felt the need for a peaceful rest after all the trials they had endured. "Yes, sometimes you just need to allow yourself to unwind and enjoy the moment," he agreed. This sanatorium, perhaps, was once an ideal place for such a retreat, full of serenity and tranquility. Their conversation was interrupted by a barely audible rustle in the branches of the trees. They both glanced towards the source of the sound, but saw nothing. Nevertheless, they didn't feel fear, rather. It was an additional reminder that nature is always full of secrets and mysteries, ready to reveal itself only to those who are ready to fully embrace it. With this thought in mind, they returned to their conversation about the future retreat. For Andre and Max, a new path had opened a path to simplicity and tranquility, which they planned to explore together, considering the possibility of spending their next vacation in such a peaceful place as this abandoned sanatorium, where time stood still, and silence and tranquility became their faithful companions. Max sat by the campfire, surrounded by the dark night silence, when suddenly he decided to share with Andre some mystical legends that permeated the mountain peaks. "Do you know, Andre, that mountains are not just places on the map. They hold many secrets and mysteries," he began, gazing into the fire, which flickered and danced in rhythm with the night wind. "Ancient theories suggest that mountains are much older than us. They have witnessed the birth and demise of civilizations, their peaks covered with layers of history that they carry within." He continued his tale, mentioning mystical caves and passages spoken of by the locals. There are many legends about passages into the depths of the mountains, leading straight to hell. People say they are somewhere in the depths, hidden from the eyes of the living, and only the chosen ones manage to find them. But no one has ever returned to confirm it. Suddenly, As if from the darkness, an unfamiliar traveler approached their campfire. His appearance was so unexpected that Andrei felt surprise more than fear. He stood up to greet the new guest. "Good evening," Andrei said, meeting the stranger's gaze. But as the traveler addressed them, Andrei noticed something strange. His face was pale, almost weathered, and there was a trace of a wound on his temple, from which blood was flowing. Andrei's heart beat faster, but he tried to remain calm. "Welcome, traveler," he said, trying to hide his unease. "How can I assist you?" The traveler didn't respond immediately. His gaze wandered around as if he was searching for something. Finally, he turned slowly to Andrei, his voice echoing from the past. "I am lost in these mountains. Perhaps you know the way out." Max felt his blood run cold as he realized that before them stood something not of this world. The stranger looked like a man, but there was something in his gaze and movements that suggested he had long departed the realm of the living. Seconds felt like an eternity as Max stared at this strange traveler, who stood before him with an indifferent expression. But then resolve took over. He knew that the dead never come alone, and that danger lurked in every shadow. Max silently rose, his hand reaching for the knife he always carried on hikes. His heart beat faster, but his eyes burned with determination. He knew he had to act quickly and decisively before the situation spiraled out of control. With a barely perceptible motion, Max threw the knife towards the undead, aiming for its heart. The precise throw was accurate enough to hit the target directly. The undead let out a muted groan and collapsed to the ground, its body twitching, then lying still. Max stood still, breathing heavily, his gaze fixed, filled with mixed feelings of horror and relief. He understood that he had done what was necessary for their survival, but there remained a bitter taste in his soul from having to kill a creature that was already dead. But now a new danger loomed before them. Max realized that the dead never come alone, and they must be wary not to become the next victims in this dark game between the world of the living and the dead. Max and Andrei exchanged determined looks. They needed to leave this place immediately and take refuge in the abandoned sanatorium. They knew that perhaps several more undead could appear following the first, and they couldn't risk their lives by staying in the open air. "Let's go, Andrei." No time to waste. Max signaled to Andrei to run towards the sanatorium, the darkness of the night enveloping them. Their hearts raced as they dashed along the dark trails, surrounded by shadows and silence. Every rustle, every gust of wind seemed like a harbinger of new danger, and they ran, relying only on their determination and survival instincts. In the midst of their escape, Max turned to Andrei, his voice firm and resolute, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. "Andrei, turn on the radio and keep the sound down," he said, pausing for a moment to give his friend instructions. "We must be prepared for a possible separation if things go wrong." Andrei, breathing heavily, nodded, following every word of Max. He was tense and wary, his eyes reflecting the tension and fatigue from the escape. But he knew that now was not the time for weakness or hesitation. Their lives depended on their ability to be ready for any challenge. With each step, the proximity of the sanatorium felt stronger, and Max and Andrei continued forward, preparing for the unpredictable trial that awaited them within its walls. They knew that only together did they stand a chance of surviving this night, steeped in mystique and threats, and they were determined to do everything possible to make it through. When Max and Andrei arrived at the abandoned sanatorium, they decided to split up, hoping that such a course of action would increase their chances of survival. Hearts pounding, they parted ways and set out to find shelter in this abandoned and eerie place. Max moved silently through the corridors, illuminated only by the faint moonlight, venturing deeper into the building. His gaze was tense, every rustle, every creak on the floor making him pause and tense in anticipation of danger. But he didn't lose vigilance, moving forward with determination to find shelter for himself. Finally, his search led him to the second floor of one of the buildings. Max stopped in front of one of the doors and slowly pushed it open, cautiously peering inside. The room seemed safe and secluded, and he decided it was the perfect place to take refuge. He entered and closed the door behind him, feeling slightly relieved to have finally found a place to rest, even if only for a while. Meanwhile, Andrei made his way through the sanatorium grounds, his heart beating faster as he approached the abandoned swimming pool. Inside, darkness prevailed, and the smell of dampness and decay hung in the air. Despite this, Andrei decided that this place could serve as good shelter for him. He descended the stairs and took cover in a recess at the edge of the pool, gripping the knife in his hand and preparing for whatever might happen. Separated but not broken, Max and Andrei continued their struggle for survival in this dark and dangerous place, hoping that their separate hiding places would help them withstand the threat that now awaited them in the darkness. Max sat hidden under the bed in the dark room, holding his breath and praying not to be noticed. His heart beat so loudly it seemed it could be heard for miles. He heard the footsteps of the undead drawing closer to the sanatorium, knowing they had begun to search the buildings. The tension in the room was palpable as the undead entered. They emitted eerie sounds, as if trying to mimic human voices, but only succeeded in instilling greater horror. Max trembled with fear, listening as they passed by his hiding spot, praying they wouldn't notice his presence. In the darkness of the room, Max heard the undead drawing closer and closer to his hiding place. He felt like he couldn't bear the tension any longer when something unexpected happened. Suddenly, one of the undead led the others out onto the street, distracting them from the building. The noise and bustle of the street filtered into the room, mingling with the sounds of their voices. Max held his breath, unable to believe his luck. The rest of the undead followed suit, leaving him in silence and darkness. Max remained in his place, unmoving, until he was sure all the undead had left. His heart still pounded fiercely, but now hope began to stir within him. He knew it was only temporary salvation, but now he had a chance to devise the next move and try to escape this trap they had fallen into. After lingering in his hiding spot for some time after the undead had departed, Max cautiously emerged. His heart still pounded heavily, but he was grateful to have survived. He carefully surveyed the surroundings, making sure the danger was gone, and decided to contact Andrei via the radio. "Andrei, do you hear me?" Max whispered, holding the radio close to his face. There was no immediate response, but after a few moments, a familiar voice came through the airwaves. "Yes, Max, I'm here. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm alive. How about you? Heard anything about the danger?" Max asked, his voice tense. "I'm alive too, but I don't know where the undead went." "They just disappeared," Andrei replied, his voice filled with the same tension. At dawn, Max and Andrei successfully made it back to the town, feeling relieved to have survived. But the sense of victory was mixed with guilt when they realized that the undead, in their search for them, stumbled upon another group planning to visit the sanatorium that night. Max felt a heavy sense of guilt, pondering whether he was indirectly responsible for the fate of those people whose lives depended on their decision to flee. Like a suffocating fog, the sense of guilt enveloped him, giving him no rest. He knew it was an inevitable consequence of their choice to survive, but it didn't make his guilt any less acute. Nevertheless, they were alive, and now they faced a new day, full of uncertainty and hope for the best. Working in the Siberian forests on a shift basis is a real challenge, testing both physical endurance and psychological resilience. Setting off for such work, people prepare themselves for complete isolation from the outside world and the necessity to rely solely on their own strength and skills. In the Siberian forests, shift workers face difficulties that most people have never encountered. They work far from civilization, where there is no access to modern conveniences and communications. Often, working conditions are far from comfortable. Temporary accommodation may be modest, and infrastructure may be limited. One of the most challenging aspects of shift work in the forests is the constant rotation of partners. This creates the need to adapt to different work styles, personalities, and characters. Some pairs may get along excellently and effectively tackle tasks, while others may experience tension and conflicts. The physical tasks facing shift workers are also extremely demanding and require high productivity. Logging, preparing firewood, and building temporary structures for accommodation, all these tasks require strength, stamina, and the ability to work as a team. However, despite the difficulties, shift work in the Siberian forests can be a source of satisfaction. For some, it's a way to seek adventure and test their resilience, while for others, it's an opportunity to earn money for their family's well-being. Moreover, contact with nature and remoteness from urban hustle and bustle can provide an opportunity to reconsider values and enjoy the simplicity of life. Slavka is a mysterious figure among the Siberian forests, whose silent and reserved behavior inevitably attracts attention. His short stature and muscular figure indicate that he is accustomed to hard work and unafraid of physical exertion. Despite his silence, there is a mysterious depth in his eyes, as if he is hiding many untold stories behind his silence. However, despite his strong physical form, Slavka's strange behavior causes you some concern. His habit of taking walks before bedtime in the cold winter conditions seems quite mysterious and inexplicable. You find yourself asking questions: where is he going? Why does he need to walk through the forest just before bed? These questions remain unanswered, intensifying your sense of uncertainty and some worry about his safety. Slavka is not inclined to share his thoughts and feelings, and his silence only enhances the mystery of his personality. Perhaps behind his silence lies some heavy secret or simply a preference to keep his thoughts to himself. This adds a new layer of interest to his character and makes you wonder what might be hiding behind his silence. Despite some concern, you also feel respect for Slavka's hard work and resilience. His ability to work diligently and not complain about difficulties earns him respect and trust. You understand that even if he takes walks through the forest at strange times, it doesn't prevent him from doing his job properly. Your duties during the shift in the Siberian forests usually include a number of routine tasks, including chopping wood and fetching water from the nearby stream. These tasks, though heavy, bring a sense of satisfaction with their results. They become part of your daily rhythm of life in the forest, but one day this rhythm is disrupted by the strange discovery on the opposite bank of the stream. At first you notice unfamiliar tracks that look completely incomprehensible. They lead from the forest to the opposite bank, a place that neither you nor your partner Slavka frequent. These tracks arouse your mistrust and anxiety, as you know that there is usually no one else in this area, except for the two of you. You begin to wonder who could have left these tracks and why. Various scenarios flash through your imagination. Perhaps these are the tracks of wild animals that rarely wander into these parts, or maybe someone deliberately stepped here, hoping to attract your attention. Despite your mistrust and anxiety, you have to continue your work. But every time you approach the stream to scoop water or drink, your gaze returns to those strange tracks on the opposite bank. They seem to tell you that something is wrong, that something mysterious and incomprehensible may be hiding in the forest. Your imagination begins to play wicked tricks on you, and you start to hear rustles in the leaves, see shadows flickering among the trees. Every time you find yourself in the forest, it feels like someone or something is watching you from the dark depths. This sense of tension and sudden danger accompanies you every day until you can unravel the mystery of those mysterious traces. The evening in the Siberian forests envelops you in a silence that becomes almost tangible. Your thoughts drift in their own currents, intertwining with the whisper of the wind and the rustle of the leaves. Each of you is absorbed in your own reflections, but the atmosphere of tension, like a shadow, continues to linger in the air. Slavka, your recent partner, remains as mysterious and unpredictable as ever. His silence and mysterious actions only intensify your sense of uncertainty and fear. Everything he does seems unknown and inexplicable, and you can't understand what makes him behave this way. You try to decipher his motives, his thoughts, but every time you think you're getting closer to understanding, Slavka does something that throws you off. His behavior creates an aura of mystery that envelops him like a veil, and you feel like you can't fully trust him. Your attempts to communicate with him often prove futile. He responds with monosyllabic answers or remains silent, distancing himself from you even further. Your sense of isolation deepens, and you begin to wonder how long you can endure this tense situation. The unknown and distrust towards your partner add a note of anxiety to your every reality. You are cautious in every step, in every word, aware that even the slightest mistake could cost you dearly in this snowy expanse where you can rely on no one but yourself. Another morning begins in the Siberian forests, and again you feel how Slavka's silence separates you from him like an insurmountable wall. His detachment from you becomes more noticeable, as if he exists in his own world, inaccessible to you. This underscores his strange and unpredictable nature, making you ponder the nature of the mystery surrounding him. Each of his gestures, each of his movements seems mysterious, as if he carries some unfathomable secret within him. Your attempts to penetrate his world, or at least understand his motives, prove futile, and you feel that the more you try to unravel his mystery, the further he drifts away. This detachment creates a sense of impending danger that seeps into your surroundings like fog, overshadowing everything around you. You begin to ask yourself questions: what is this person hiding? Why is his behavior so mysterious? And most importantly, how much can you trust him when you are in such a vulnerable position, far from civilization and help? The feeling of mystery, danger, and uncertainty is so deeply woven into the atmosphere of the surrounding space that it seems as if every breath is filled with mystery. You continue your duties, but your trust in your partner tends towards zero, and you begin to realize that in this harsh environment, no one should be trusting. Your preferences lean towards silent and withdrawn people, those who prefer to express themselves not in words but in actions. After all, in silence and tranquility, you feel more comfortable, more confident. However, being in isolation with a partner like Slavka in the Siberian taiga, this preference turns into something more than just a preference. It becomes a question of survival. Slavka's strange habits and actions only intensify your sense of discomfort and anxiety. His silence and avoidance of communication create the feeling that there is some insurmountable gap between you, as if he deliberately keeps you at arm's length. This distancing approach is reinforced by strange walks in the darkness, when every rustle of the forest seems like a harbinger of some unknown danger. You begin to realize that your partnership in such conditions is not just a matter of preference, it's a matter of safety. After all, in the absence of civilization and amidst nature, you rely on each other as the only support. And your partner's strange behavior jeopardizes this support, making you doubt his reliability and concern for your mutual well-being. The alarm grows with each passing day, and you begin to wonder what lies behind this silent facade. Perhaps there is some secret hidden in his silence that could be the cause of your trouble? Or maybe he simply doesn't trust you as much as you trust him, leaving you vulnerable in this unpredictable environment. Thus, your sense of discomfort and anxiety continues to grow with each moment spent in isolation with this mysterious partner in the Siberian taiga. The presumed sense of security in an isolated place begins to crack when you discover these mysterious tracks around the creek clearing. It all starts as a typical day on which you carry out your duties, chop wood, fetch water from the creek. But at one moment, your gaze catches something strange on the opposite shore. These tracks look unusual. They don't fit the normal abrasions from animals or humans. They seem inexplicable, mysterious, as if left by someone or something beyond your understanding. Their shape, placement, and size raise your suspicion and fear, intensifying the sense of uncertainty about the safety of this isolated place. You begin to ask yourself who or what could have left these tracks, for what motives, and what could this mean for your own safety? Every step, every movement in this environment becomes a subject of analysis and paranoia. Your mind starts to conjure up various scenarios, from wild animals to potential ominous visitors from outside. In this isolation context, even the most innocent tracks can become objects of your fear and anxiety, as they may pose a threat to your safety and well-being. Thus, these strange tracks found around the creek clearing become a symbol of your uncertainty and unease in this isolated corner of the world. They remind you that in this wild and unpredictable nature, every moment can be filled with unknown fear and danger. When Slavka disappears into the darkness of the forest, your feelings of worry and anxiety escalate to their limits. Your thoughts slow down, as if every second turns into an eternity full of uncertainty and fear. After all, in this harsh and secluded environment, any disappearance becomes a subject of deep concern and fear. Slavka, usually a bit mysterious and silent, now turns into a shadow among the dark trees, his presence disappearing into the impenetrable blackness of the forest. The most frightening scenarios emerge in your imagination. He could have gotten into trouble, encountered wild animals, or even become a victim of some unknown and dangerous presence lurking in the dark corners of the forest. At the same time, you begin to doubt your own safety. After all, if Slavka can disappear so easily in this forest, what can guarantee your own protection? Everything around seems mysterious and threatening, and you feel that your safety depends on unknown and unpredictable forces that control this dark corner of nature. This moment becomes the culmination of your fear and anxiety, highlighting not only real dangers but also your own internal demons. In this dark, ominous atmosphere, your imagination begins to play tricks on you, filling your mind with terrifying images and leading to wild speculations about what may lurk in the darkness of the forest. The appearance of new tracks on the creek shore becomes a strange and mysterious event that amplifies your sense of tension and unease. You feel waves of anxiety flooding your consciousness, as if something sinister is beginning to awaken in this secluded part of the taiga. These tracks evoke distrust and suspicion in you, highlighting the mystery of the events around you. You begin to scrutinize every detail, trying to penetrate their hidden meanings. Who or what could have left these tracks? Why did they appear here and now? These questions swirl in your mind, stirring your imagination and making your heart beat even faster. You feel like some dark story is unfolding right before your eyes, and every track leads you to its unraveling. Simultaneously, you realize that these tracks may mark the beginning of something much more sinister and dangerous than you could ever imagine. As you progress in your investigation, the sense of uncertainty and fear only intensifies. It feels like something is lurking here, something you cannot see or understand, but nevertheless poses a threat. You feel you must be vigilant, ready for any possible consequences, for in this taiga full of mysteries and dangers, one cannot be too cautious. Slavka's disappearance leaves you with a profound sense of helplessness and despair, which only intensifies in the isolation of the taiga. Suddenly realizing that your friend has vanished without a trace in this unforgiving forest, you plunge into an ocean of fear and uncertainty that surrounds you from all sides. Anxiety becomes your constant companion as you try to grasp what could have happened to Slavka. Dark thoughts and frightening assumptions about his fate swirl in your mind. You feel completely powerless, unable to muster the strength and resources to find him in this merciless wilderness. The isolation of the taiga adds even more tragedy to the situation, leaving you without support and assistance in the search for your missing friend. Your hopelessness deepens as you realize that time and resources are insufficient to explore every corner of this vast and gloomy forest. The sense of uncertainty casts a shadow of fear over you, and you begin to imagine the most dreadful scenarios. Dark thoughts about what could have happened to Slavka weigh on you like an invisible burden dragging you down. Meanwhile, the taiga remains silent, shrouding you in its silent mystery. The whole world seems impenetrable and hostile, and you are left alone with your fears and doubts. The appearance of the grotesque creature in the darkness near the cabin seals your fear and horror, making your heart beat faster and covering your skin with cold sweat. Your senses are heightened, as if a string, and you are immersed in an atmosphere of indescribable anxiety as you encounter this sinister figure. The creature's distorted face fills you with disgust and despair. Its dark, empty eye sockets and giant menacing mouth fill you with a sense of horror, as if you have encountered something ancient and sinister beyond your understanding. Every movement it makes fills you with terror, its pacing around the cabin, knocking on the door, walls, and windows, as if it's some horrifying ritual aimed at intimidating you and amplifying your fear. The dull sounds of the night merge with its presence, creating the sensation that you have entered a nightmare. You feel each breath is labored as the creature approaches the door of your sanctuary. Your thoughts are filled with only one desire: to escape, to hide, to save yourself from this nightmarish vision that has become a reality right before your eyes. Fear makes you tremble, and your nerves are stretched to the limit. You feel like you could lose control of yourself at any moment, and this only adds panic to the existing fear. In this moment, you realize that the encounter with this creature is just the beginning of something incredible and horrible, remaining a mystery and secret in this merciless taiga. 3 days in isolation, filled with fear and panic, become a real ordeal for the main character, throwing him into the deepest well of horror. He feels how every minute spent alone in the dark and merciless forest weighs on his soul with the weight of helplessness and despair. The fear engulfing him, like a flame, ignites the inner fire of fear that does not let him rest for a moment. The discovery of Slavka's mutilated body in the darkness of the taiga adds even more mystery and horror to everything that is happening. Seeing his maimed body chained to a tree makes the hero realize that he has encountered something beyond his understanding and perception. The gruesome details of finding the body, its horrifying condition, evoke even more feelings of danger and uncertainty about the surrounding environment. At this moment, he realizes that the forces at work in the darkness of the forest go far beyond his understanding and control. It's something mysterious and sinister lurking in the depths of the forest, something he cannot cope with alone. He remains at the center of a whirlwind of horror, surrounded by mysteries and secrets that seem inexplicable and unbelievable. The consequences of the terrifying events experienced by the main character have a profound psychological impact, which becomes an integral part of his life. The constant fear and anxiety caused by the horrifying twists in the taiga leave an indelible mark on his psyche. The trauma endured in the horrific conditions penetrates deep into his consciousness, creating constant tension and discomfort. The hero remains under the sway of memories of what happened, which continue to torment him even after he has returned to civilization. The shadow of past events haunts him at the most unexpected moments, reminding him of his vulnerability and powerlessness against the forces of nature and evil. Every rustle in the forest, every nocturnal shadow, reminds him that he remains captive to his own fears and demons. Memories of his lost friend and the horror of those 3 days in isolation become an invisible chain binding him to the past and giving him no rest in the present. Despite all attempts to forget and move on, the hero continues to live with this burden, which seems unbearable. And although he may return to a normal life, the shadow of past events remains forever in his heart and mind, reminding him of his helplessness and vulnerability before the power of nature and the unknown.